Welcome, Wax Ecstatic fans. I'm your host, Matt Sammon, and it is time for another classic cardboard review. That's right, we're not cracking wax this time, although, boy, I wish I had some 1972 Topps packs to open here. I'm not that quite well off. Don't have any original 72 unopened packs to look through, but I do have several pages from my own personal collection here. Some cards in better shape than others. But on our next podcast, which will drop this upcoming Friday, that will be March the 26th, we will be looking not only back at 72 Topps, but this is something we've been doing over the last few years, looking at a current product, the 2021 Topps Heritage Set, which is based on the legendary 1972 design. And as we've done the last couple of years, we'll bring in our good friend from baseballhappenings.net, Forbes contributor, Topps influencer Nick Diunte. Will talk to us about not just the Topps Heritage Set, but the new Topps products that are out there. And if you've tried to buy some at your local Walmart or Target or non-hobby shop, it's a little difficult to do. Baseball cards are booming right now. We'll talk to Nick about that as well. But let's focus on 1972 Topps. I'm keeping these in the pages because, as you can see, there are some notable names and some legendary cards too. And while I'm just kind of flipping through these particular pages here, and you can see some of the more notable names, 1972 Topps features some legendary cards, including this one. Of course, we have featured this card on our look at multiple rookie cards, the Andrew Ridgely Show. You know who Hall of Famer Carlton Fisk is. There's a good chance you know who Cecil Cooper is. You probably don't know who Mike Garman is. And that, of course, is the pitfall of some of these older cards. This guy would ride the coattails of this guy, and they both rode the coattails of this guy on their baseball card journey. But as we go looking through some of these classic cards here, and we'll talk about the childhood photos in just a little bit. But as we go through here, we'll talk a little bit about the 72 set in our next podcast, again, coming out this Friday, March 26th, as we're talking about a set that is very indicative of 1972 America. And Topps definitely grabbed kind of a comic book look to some of their cards here in 1972. And we'll also take a look at the debut of the Texas Rangers, who, as the former Washington Senators, pretty much had all of their cards airbrushed. We'll look at the wacky, superhero comic team cards there. Speaking of wacky, we'll perhaps talk a little bit about this legendary card from 1972, where Billy Cowan looks like he's sporting the actual halo, the old Big A scoreboard there in the background. And we'll talk about some of the things that made 72 Topps different, not just the wild design here. And like I said, this is very representative not only of 1972, but really the early 70s in general. But we'll also talk about some of the innovative cards that set had. For example, the childhood photos of the stars. Here's Wilbur Wood fishing. Here's Jim Fregosi playing. That is just awesome there. He's got the squeeze box going. Sorry, I had a little glare there. But Jim Fregosi with the accordion. And, of course, there's some unique story about young Jim Fregosi here on the back. So we'll talk about those cards, but also, as I flip ahead here, something that was a big deal in 1972. No, not just the review of the previous year's World Series, but also the in-action cards. This was actually something that was totally different from baseball cards up until that point. As we've got Reggie Smith here horizontally. Not only did they feature the cards of the players in action, but also Topps did something really cool, and that was how they placed them inside the set here. These cards were designed to be placed one next to the other. So, for example, Cleon Jones, his base card, right there. Cleon Jones, his action card. I should probably put these next to each other, actually, in the pages. So, Cleon Jones here, card number, I'll get that up to the camera here, 31. Cleon Jones action card number 32. So if you were assembling your 1972 Topps set and who wasn't, you could actually have these two cards side by side, either on display or in a shoe box or a Velveeta cheese box, whatever the case was. And that was a unique way of Topps not only taking the standard, here's Cleon Jones just smiling away, looks like at Shea Stadium there, but also Cleon Jones scurrying around the base paths too. And there are a lot of unique things about the in-action cards. For example, when you flip them over, so I showed you the Cleon Jones, it was a big promotional card. What else you got in a 72 Topps pack? These two in-action cards are pieces to a Joe Torre puzzle. So before Donruss had the puzzle pieces, and Topps had done this with some previous cards and previous sets, you had a puzzle. If you strung together enough of these cards, you could have Joe Torre in the background. You also had this very lengthy, and this is on the back of the Danny Frizella in-action card, a very lengthy baseball trivia story on the back here with the answer written upside down there. And then you have this unique one here. Here's the great Billy Williams, Chicago Cubs star right there in action. Looks like at a fairly empty Candlestick Park, I'm thinking. You flip it over on the back, and his in-action card actually has this interesting back here where it's talking about J.R. Richards' first major league game where he strikes out 15 batters. Now, that is certainly notable. It's a unique event from the 1971 season. But J.R. Richard, of course, with the Houston Astros, this game was against the San Francisco Giants that has absolutely nothing to do with Billy Williams of the Chicago Cubs. So you had some interesting things like that. Series 5 and 6 is a rarity. The high series, the 787 card set, released in only 6 series that year. So Davey Johnson, even though this Davey Johnson card is a little beat up, coming in as card number 680. And here's Don Money of the Philadelphia Phillies underneath at 635. High series card number, so even though they're a little beat up, you're going to still pay a premium for some of these simply because they're a little more rare than the lower series cards. So as I mentioned, you've got the in-action cards. This is something that would become a staple of baseball cards for many, many, many years. Gone were the days of the staged photographs, and in came the the action photos. We wanted to see the guys in action. You also had from those cards some very interesting moments in time. For example, Sparky Lyle here. Now, this isn't a rookie card. In fact, I believe this was his 3rd card. There's a great joke here on the back, and it wasn't meant to be a joke. It's a trivia question. Right up here, it just says, how long is the pitcher's rubber? And the answer, of course, is 24 inches. Now, if you don't know that the pitcher's rubber is the thing that he stands on top of the mound, and you thought that Sparky Lyle had a 24-inch rubber, you may have been a little bashful, and he would have been very popular with the ladies, if you catch my drift. Like I said, you've got the childhood photographs there. You've also got a great collection of league leader cards. These are very affordable ways to collect some Hall of Famers here. I mean, Tom Seaver, Fergie Jenkins, and of course Bill Stoneman was a pretty unique character in and of himself. Vida Blue, Wilbur Wood, Jim Palmer. You got Belton Bill Melton. That's what I'm trying to say. Norm Cash and Reggie Jackson, your American League home run hitters and leaders from 1971. So you've got a lot of very interesting characteristics that all came together in 1971. And not only do you have those unique cards, you've got some sad cards, including Gil Hodges. He, of course, would pass away during spring training of 1972. In fact, the OPG card notes that down here it would say in memoriam. Also, and I don't have this card, unfortunately, but also you have the great Roberto Clemente, very, kind of forlongingly looking at a ball that he's tossing in the air. That would be his last card as a player. Of course, he would have a 73 Topps card, but he was deceased by the start of the 73 season. And you also had the first edition of the traded cards, which we talked about in our last show. So we've got a lot to discuss here in this upcoming podcast, including the bottom third, the three players that we're going to talk about, give you a little more details about some of your favorite players or maybe players that you didn't know much about. Let's actually start as I'm looking at this first page. We'll talk about Tug McGraw and of course his famous son as well. That's an interesting story in and of itself. Now we got a lot of Hall of Famers here, but let's talk about the guy who's in the Hall of Fame for reasons that he never planned on. Ron Blomberg, the first designated hitter in 1973. There's an interesting story about how Blomberg almost missed out on that opportunity. In fact, there was a good chance that Orlando Cepeda would have been the first designated hitter in Major League history. And last but not least, let's see, who else should we get here? Let's see, we talked a little bit about Sparky Lyle. Let's talk more about Sparky Lyle. We'll bring up Sparky in this upcoming podcast as well. And no, ladies, he does not use a 24-inch rubber, at least beyond the pitcher's mound, as far as we know. So you have action cards. You have photographs of the guys when they were little kids. You've got all sorts of interesting and fun, goofy shots like Billy Cowan here. And, of course, a bevy of Hall of Famers. I mean, look at these guys here. Blyleven, Munson, Willie Mays, who, of course, was a member of the Mets at this time. We got Brooks Robinson, Harmon Killebrew, Frank Robinson, who was another guy who was traded. He eventually went to the LA Dodgers, so you would get the traded card there. A lot of memorable cards from 1972 should make for a memorable Topps Heritage set, which is out now. And hopefully we'll have a memorable podcast for you with our guest, Nick Diunte of baseballhappenings.net. It's all coming your way this Friday, March 26th, noon Eastern, on the next Wax Ecstatic. And don't forget, this is our new YouTube page. Make sure that you subscribe to get all the latest Wax Ecstatic videos.